in the Department of Health and Rehabilitation Sciences at Temple University and a member of the Temple University Collaborative. With me today is Hannah Wells. Hannah is, tell me your title again. Hannah has a different title than last time.
Yeah, no worries. I'm a health equity project manager with the Institute on Disabilities at Temple.
Yeah, and so we're both at Temple University. Hannah has been working with us on this project, PODS, Power of Dependable Souls, now for a few years. And as the project starts to wrap up, we wanted to do a quick overview and training on the PODS project. And so Hannah and I have sort of divided this up half and half, and I will begin with some of the background information. So first of all, the PODS project really came out of the Temple University Collaborative on Community Inclusion. I actually noticed a number of North Carolina folks, they might be familiar with the Temple University Collaborative. We are a research and training center at Temple University. And one of the things that is part of our mission is to disseminate information supporting people with mental health conditions to be included and participate in their communities. And so some of the documents you see here on the screen are documents that are available from our website. You can see all of this at tucollaborative.org. All of our documentation is available for free. And so I really encourage you, if there's an area including PODS, we are working on some of the resources for this discussion that we're going to do today, but we'll have more of that available. But right now we have lots of information on a variety of areas. So today we're going to give some background on where the PODS program came from, and then Hannah is going to talk more about the pilot that we've been implementing over the past few years, funded by the state of Pennsylvania. This project is part of a larger health equity grant from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention that was awarded to the Pennsylvania Department of Health to address issues around the long-term effects of the COVID pandemic. And so this is where we're going to get started. So one of the projects that I work on and really have been working a lot with is the areas around isolation and loneliness. While PODS is one of our projects, there are other projects that we're working on here at the Collaborative to address issues of isolation and loneliness among adults who experience serious mental illness. One of the things that we know about folks who experience serious mental illness is they really have much higher levels of loneliness than other adults. In addition to some of these areas of identified as the greatest need, in fact, it comes across pretty frequently, is that social relationships, social connection, reducing loneliness is one of the greatest areas of need of people who are living with significant mental health challenges. We know that they're much more isolated. For example, in our own work, we have identified that while 49% of adults with serious mental illness live alone, only 17% of adults who don't have these conditions live alone. They're also much more likely to be single or never married, 65% reporting being single or never married versus 31% of adults who don't have a serious mental illness. And we know that they know significantly fewer neighbors. And so their connection in their own environments they have fewer social connection. When we look at the social networks, we know that research shows that the social networks in which they're embedded are about 2.5 times smaller than those of other adults. They are more frequently made up of other mental health system users. This isn't necessarily something that's negative, and in fact can be a positive factor in the sense that other mental health system service users know the live. They have some of the same experience. They typically have the networks made up of fewer friends. There are oftentimes more mental health system providers. And then one of the other things that's really important is that we know that the social networks they are embedded in have more churn. There's more turnover. This can be due to rehospitalization, incarceration, residential relocation. So variety of things that cause the network itself to turn over fairly significantly. And then we know that people with serious mental illness have higher rates of loneliness. Um, the histograms on the right are some things that we first started when we were first trying to figure out what is loneliness among people with serious mental illness. And we knew that it was high among folks with serious mental illness. And so the bottom bar chart shows individuals with serious mental illness, and the top one shows people without. And these are both two distributions of about 200 adults. And so what we did was we decided what is high loneliness. And so in the top grouping, the line, the dark line, shows the 25th percentile. In other words, to the right of that line, among adults without serious mental illness, 25% of adults have that level of loneliness. In contrast, when we transfer that same figure down to the bottom, we see that 2/3 of adults with serious mental illness are above that level. And then when we go to the issues of severe loneliness, we're looking at the top 10% of adults without serious mental illness. We transfer that to the bottom line, where still 40% of adults with serious mental illness experience severe levels of loneliness. So what we find is that loneliness is a pervasive problem among people with significant mental health conditions. And the other research shows that what happened during the pandemic is this only exacerbated the problem. And so the social distancing orders, the disconnection from community, the orders to stay home, all of these made these conditions worse. So one of the things that we know is that in addition to being emotionally negative, social isolation and loneliness also come with some significant health impacts. For example, we know that social isolation results in or is associated with poor health behaviors such as heavy drinking, sedentary behavior, and poor nutrition. We also have found research shows that there is cognitive decline and increased risk of dementia. One of the papers that we recently did was one called Getting Out of the House, about the benefits of simply leaving one's place of residence on a regular basis. Isolation also results in HPA axis activation. That's the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, and that is the part of our neuroendocrine system that's activated when we're threatened. This is the fight or flight syndrome. And this chronic activation results in oxidative stress, inflammation, cardiovascular disease. And so, not surprisingly, social isolation is associated with greater mortality risk. Loneliness also has physiological outcomes. So, first of all, we know that it's associated with depressive symptoms, and oftentimes depressive symptoms themselves, we see poor general health, poor sleep quality. These all come together as a cluster, and we know that loneliness has elevated levels along these lines. Similar to social isolation, there also are cognitive impacts that people who have high levels of loneliness have difficulties in cognitive control, and we see greater overall cognitive decline among people who experience high levels of loneliness. Similar to the isolation, we see this elevated cortisol, and cortisol is an indicator of chronic stress. And so loneliness itself produces this stress condition that results in this physiological cortisol reaction. Finally, we know that loneliness is associated with suicidal thoughts and attempts. And so this is really one of the things that loneliness connects with that is commonly known. So the question is, how does this actually work? We know that it's emotionally negative, but how does it work when it comes to individual outcomes? One of the arguments that comes from some of the folks who've done a lot of work in this area on loneliness argue that loneliness produces this feeling of unsafety. And the argument is that loneliness is in fact a adaptive response, that as we are social beings, loneliness tells us that our social connections are not what they should be, and we need to do something about that. And so when we feel lonely, we are spurred to try and do something to undo that loneliness. And this feeling of unsafety results in that. But a lot of times people don't really result in actions to try and undo the poor social connections, and so it becomes more chronic. As a result, when people feel unsafe, they become hypervigilant. And so people who experience high levels of loneliness now become hypervigilant for social threat. So indicators in their social world that sort of reinforces their loneliness. The result of this social threat results in a cognitive bias. And so it can be shown and has been shown experimentally that people who have high levels of loneliness are much more likely to result in perceiving greater threat in their environment when they interact with people, that they perceive their interactions negatively, and they're more likely to retain negative information. This situation level of loneliness. Excuse me a second, I have these lights that automatically turn off and I can't see my screen anymore. The joys of technology. If only it was pointing somewhere where I sit in the room as opposed to the back of the room where there are no people. Anyways, so we get this cycle that results in this greater level of loneliness reproducing itself. But the results that are impacting us physiologically are through this idea of hypervigilance. And through hypervigilance, there's this idea called cognitive load, and it basically says our brains can only handle so much. And that when we have constant stressors, poverty is an example of something that adds to cognitive load. But this loneliness, hypervigilance adds to our cognitive load, which limits our abilities to regulate ourselves. And so what we see is that when people are lonely and the hypervigilance takes place, it limits our abilities to regulate positive emotion. It tends to result in lower physical activity. We see greater obesity and we see more alcohol abuse. Hypervigilance also is that threat perception that activates the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the HPA axis. And this results in cardiovascular outcomes like hypertension, atherosclerosis, and coronary heart disease. And so while we know that loneliness is an emotionally negative experience, it is just as much a physiological health threat. And so one of the things that we're working on is ways to try and address loneliness. So our approach has been to focus on community participation as one avenue. At the collaborative, we talk about community inclusion and participation. And when we talk about community participation, we're talking about participation in broad areas and broad domains of one's world and community. This can be in communities of faith. This can be through work. This can be through education. It can be through recreation and leisure, civic participation. We're increasingly looking at volunteering as a domain of community participation. And so when we look at community participation, we really are focused on a broad set of domains. So some of the things that we talk about at the collaborative when it comes to community participation, first of all, is that community participation is a medical necessity. This terminology is not by accident. One of the things that we focus on, and a lot of times folks are supported by, whether it's health insurance, public or private, that requires the supports that they receive to be medically necessary. And one of the ways that we've defined this idea of medical necessity is by looking at what are the impacts of community exclusion. And community exclusion results in a number of negative health indicators, including decreasing cognition. We see less physical activity. We see poor social connection, loneliness. There are a variety of negative impacts of non-participation. And so when we consider this as a medical necessity, we argue that community participation is a part of health no different than any other. And so it really should be funded and supported. We know that it improves cognition. We know that it improves access to others and the ability to build social connections. We getting out of the house facilitates physical activity. And so we know that simply getting out and doing something increases people's physical activity and decreases sedentary behavior, which is another significant health threat. And finally, we know that being in the community is associated with a more positive mood and emotion. And so community participation, first and foremost, is a medical necessity, but it's also a human right, that just because someone has a particular health condition, whether that's a mental health condition, a physical health condition, intellectual, neurological, any type of health condition, just because someone has a health condition, they still have the rights to live, work, and play in the communities in which they live, just as anyone else. And so that really is one of the components of our approach, that community participation isn't icing on the cake. It is a human right. And then finally, this idea of self-directed care. And this is really where we try and focus on helping people to do the things that they want to do. For those folks working in the domain of supports, self-directed care and individual planning is really a key cornerstone to the services provided. And so encouraging and supporting people to be self-directed in what are the domains of the community that they would like to be involved in. One of the things that we do see is that over time, people start to sort of become inert, their activity and their domains in which they can participate um, becomes narrower and narrower and narrower. And helping people to really be self-directed, to be able to identify what it is they want to do and be able to do those things is a significant part of community participation. Um, We also talk about community participation, not just as an end goal, but as a correlate of a number of health outcomes. We know I mentioned cognition and connections, but we also know that community participation can contribute to quality of life, feelings of self-esteem and satisfaction. It can build social support networks. It contributes to physical health and wellness. And so may allow people also to resist and renegotiate identities and resist internalized stigma. And so we focus on community participation as a contributor. The other thing too is important is we don't focus on readiness at the collaborative. We really take an approach that says getting people ready to do something, oftentimes they're never ready. The reality is, not unlike the individualized placement and support model, is to encourage people to get into the things they want to do and support them to do those things, as opposed to spend a lot of time in training and readiness, instead to simply to support people to get out there and get engaged. We do see a lot of barriers, and this is something that we see consistently across many of the places where new programs are trying to be implemented, particularly those that support community participation. Issues around finances and transportation are some of the bigger ones that people come to, and oftentimes people do have limited resources. There are increasingly innovative ways to address transportation, even in small and rural communities that we're finding. Another is a lack of knowledge of information, and so this is really where support services can help to identify what's available. People do sometimes feel like they don't belong or they're unwelcome in places, and this is another issue that we oftentimes have to address, is how do we help people to identify areas in which they'd like to participate and then find places where they feel like they are welcome. And then the last barrier that we do see is because of a lack of participation in the past, oftentimes folks feel like they don't have the capacity or the efficacy to do that in the future. And this is really where the PODS comes into play. So one of the facilitators of our pilot program really identified one of the challenges of promoting this is that while they've been doing psych rehab for almost 24 years and social connection and participation is always a hole, they said, it's a need that we haven't really been able to fulfill easily. I like that joining PODS has pushed us to focus on it. Hopefully we'll fill that hole in a bit because it's an important part of living. And so some of the folks who did PODS really recognized the value of this turn to focus on community participation. So the intervention that we developed and that we tested and Hannah really facilitated its implementation was called the Power of Dependable Souls, or PODS. PODS was designed to address isolation and loneliness for folks seeking mental health recovery, particularly through community participation. As I mentioned, it was part of the Pennsylvania Department of Health's Preventative Health and Health Services grant, and was created and delivered within mental health providers in the state of Pennsylvania, as it was funded by the Pennsylvania Department of Health. And so it was an opportunity to support participants to find these interests and pursue independent community participation. We began by developing the PODS program with an advisory committee of people with lived experience. The ideas were there to begin with in getting people together to identify shared interest areas and to engage in those interests. But we wanted to make sure that it was informed by people who lived with mental health conditions. This included peer specialists and peer specialist supervisors. And so the PODS program, and Hannah's going to talk about the details in just a moment, but the PODS program was really based on this idea of collective efficacy. The idea of collective efficacy is that together people can overcome challenges, that they can address barriers more effectively together than any one individual can do that alone. Additionally, that through engaging in these types of activities, through being able to participate in their communities in the ways that interest them in their own desires, really helps to resist the stigma of the mental health label. And so through collectively solving problems and engaging in the community like anyone else, it provides an opportunity to really resist the negative labels and the devaluation that is associated oftentimes with a mental health diagnosis. And through community participation, we really saw this as a way that friendships develop and social connections develop. One of the things that I focus on a lot of times in some of the work that I do is how do relationships form? And one of the ways that we know in adults that relationships form around shared interests. And when people get together and engage in whether it's recreation and leisure, whether it's a common interest around volunteering, whether it's a common experience in work or communities of faith or any other area, it's an opportunity for people to identify their similarities and then build those relationships around those. So this is really the basis of the PODS intervention. And so Hannah is going to talk at this point about the PODS program itself.
Thanks, Brian. So Brian took us through the background and kind of the development of pods, and now I'll take it off with the pilot program itself. So he did mention already that we piloted this program with mental health agencies across Pennsylvania, and we actually worked with 17 agencies. They were mostly psychiatric rehabilitation groups, but we also had some peer support programs and a couple other types of agencies as well. But the focus in this was independent, sustainable community participation. So what that meant was we weren't giving money to agencies to implement it. We weren't funding the project. We weren't funding the community participation piece because we wanted, when the grant was over, to be able to, for agencies to continue this even when there's no additional grant money existing. So that was our intent with this project. So a brief overview of what PODS was, what it looked like, what it is. The agency implements PODS as a part of normal programming. So just like any other group that you may run, this is how PODS worked, right? It was just any other group that they had. Facilitators or staff at the agency worked to bring participants together. So if they knew of anyone who was interested in doing more activities and building social connections, they encouraged them to join the group and really shared information about it. Once participants indicate interest, they join what's called a collective. And a collective is all the consumers who are in pods. They meet on a regular basis to plan community participation and break out into smaller groups. So what they'll do after they start meeting as that large group is they use what's called the Temple University Community Participation Measure. And this is essentially like a long list of questions around things that people can do in the community to help people kind of identify what interests they have and what activities they may want to group together based on. We'll speak to that a little bit more in a second. But again, after the TUCP, they will then break out into smaller groups called pods based off of shared interest in community participation. So if there's a few members of the group who are interested in volunteering, they could create a volunteering pod. Maybe a few others are interested in some type of sports activity. They could group together based off that, so on and so forth. After that, it's really important to set up some type of communication method among participants, right? If people are going out into the community and doing things, you got to know how to talk to each other, how to get in touch with each other to make those plans. So that's the key part as well. Then the interest-based pods will continuously plan what they want to do in the community during collective meetings. So a lot of agencies, they met weekly or bi-weekly at the beginning and then kind of space those meetings out a little more as things progressed. But during those meetings is when those pods figure out what they want to do and then how they're going to do it. So they can help look up resources that exist in the community and figure out transportation and where they want to go and all that stuff. Throughout this, the facilitators are simply providing support. So if the facilitators aren't directing things, they're not planning for, they're just there to kind of help bring people together, troubleshoot with the members, and really empower them to make their own decisions. through pods, through getting people on board, explaining it. One thing I want to highlight is that for a lot of our agencies, it took a lot of repeating and explaining what pods is on many different occasions to really help people understand what this new program was, what it will look like, and how they can participate. On the screen here, we have a graphic representing what a collective is at an agency, right? So the collective is everyone who's in pods at that agency, and the facilitators are also there. So in the rectangle here, this represents the collective, which is that larger group where everyone meets together. Out of the collective, you'll break out into those smaller groups or the pods based off of shared interests. So on the screen here, we have gardening, sports, employment, and each of those pods has a community connection, meaning that that group is going to go out into the community and do that activity together. So for example, if there's that volunteer pod, they will work together to figure out, hey, we all want to volunteer, where can we go, how can we get there, and then they'll go out and do it together independently. A couple of, I guess, implementation notes with this. This isn't set in stone. So these pods, it's not like people have to decide up front what they want to do and then stick with it forever. These are designed to help people do things in their community. And so as people's needs and wants change, they can change what pods they're in. Things may not work out right away, and that's okay. One of the participants that I was meeting with, he said, like, if something doesn't work, just try something else, right? And so if one pod just isn't really vibing, it's not really working, you can totally change and decide what to do next. Some of our agencies, rather than breaking out into pods right off the bat, their larger groups worked on just rotating through activities so that they could get to know each other a little bit more and figure out what their interests were before then breaking out into some smaller pods more naturally later on. So this phase, this part of the project is really just about encouraging exploration and curiosity throughout this whole thing. So earlier I mentioned the TUCP, the Temple University Community Participation Measure, and this is the questionnaire that the collective will use to figure out what it is that they want to do with their pods. So there's a bunch of questions on there about different things people can do in the community. So I just have a screenshot here with two activities, which were going to a library and entertaining friends in your home. Each area of community participation asks 3 questions. So it's pretty repetitive, but it's really a conversation starter and helps people reflect on what they want to do, right? Because if it's sometimes hard if you just ask someone, hey, what do you want to do in the community? It's hard to just answer that. Whereas when you have this measure and can really see all these different possible activities, it's much easier to be like, you know what, yes, I love going to the library, or I hate going to museums, or whatever that might be. So again, each activity asks 3 questions. The first one is, how many days in the last 30 days did you do this activity without a staff person with you? And so you can answer obviously anywhere from 0 to 30. Then they ask you, do you do this activity enough, not enough, or too much? And is this activity important to you? Because then if you start to see some trends where things are important, but you're not doing them enough, is that maybe an activity that you want to pursue with a pod? Now, this TUCP isn't like where you fill it out and then you're assigned to groups based off responses. It doesn't mean you're stuck to what's on there or what you respond with. Again, it's really just a conversation starter, a tool to help people reflect and start to identify what it is they may want to do. If people have been isolated and not doing things for a long time, or have kind of lost interest in things, it can be, again, hard just to answer right off the bat with this really big open-ended question. So this is a starting point to help get people talking. A couple adaptations for this form could be skipping the number of days in the last 30 days, or answering based off of a long time ago. If people are like, well, I haven't done anything in like 3 years, again, they can just kind of reflect back on what they used to do and maybe try to reflect based off of maybe when they were feeling well. Or maybe just explore, does this sound like something you may want to try, even if it's not something that you've done before? So throughout the PODS project the last few years, one of the things that I did was I worked on compiling some common misunderstandings, especially when I was going through and training agencies and meeting with agencies about PODS. So PODS is not about the facilitator setting interest in planning outings for participants, right? So as staff, we're not going to be figuring out, you know what, let's take everyone out in a bus to the museum. It's not taking on the brunt of the planning. It's not about agencies providing funding for events and outings. Again, I spoke earlier about sustainability of community participation. And if agencies funded activities for participants, it's great in the moment because they can go out and do those things. But when that funding goes away or when they're no longer able to offer that stipend, then the participants won't be able to continue doing what they're already doing. It's also not limited to social, recreation, and leisure interests. So we've really honed in on this piece a lot for funding reasons, but even to help people expand their idea of what pods could be. So one example, at one of our pilot agencies, there were a few members who didn't have driver's licenses, but really wanted to. And so they worked together. I believe a couple of them did get their license in the end. So they were able to help support each other in that way. Um, it's also not about perfection and rigidity. So there's a structure with the PODS program, but we really encourage agencies to adapt it to make it work for them. And that's something that we saw a lot throughout the pilot program, as long as we're keeping like the key focus of PODS with promoting that independent community participation in the group setting, then really there's a lot of flexibility. And I think that really helps also empower participants because it's so participant driven. If they're able to really figure out what works and what doesn't work for them, and we have less of a focus on it being very rigid, then that can be really helpful for folks as well. PODS is, on the other hand, about, again, participants finding common interest and then developing smaller groups, those PODS, based on those common interests. It is about helping participants learn how to navigate barriers, including finances and transportation, to participate in the community. I've listed finances and transportation because those are like the two biggest ones, but it really is about helping people learn how to not only navigate those existing barriers, but also really be creative and figure out, like, if these are all the barriers and we can't remove them or take them away, what are some different things that we can do? Like, how can we be really creative? And we have seen so much creativity come from agencies when participants have really been put in that driver's seat. Because if there's 15 people in a group, all of those people together can really band together and think of different things and have different perspectives and different ideas. Whereas if it was just the facilitator trying to come up with those things, like, it's much harder and we may not have all those different perspectives. And then last, it is about participants learning how to plan their own community participation. So for example, learning about where to go, how to get there, communicating, navigating challenges, all those different things. So it's not about removing barriers. We want this, again, to be that sustainable participation. So the barriers on the left here probably look familiar because Brian touched on them earlier, but I wanted to briefly touch on how PODS can help address some of these barriers. And so the first one here is finances, limited finances. And so some of the strategies that people have done and will do include strategies for finding discount days. So discount days are found in a lot of places like bowling alleys. And so just helping people know that and learn where to go to find that information and how to call and things like that. Finding free and cheap things that we can do as a group. Having budgeting discussions in collective meetings. So one of our sites, they were doing discount days at a bowling alley, and one of the participants wasn't following through with going. And so the peer specialist who was running the group checked in with him to see kind of what was going on and if he needed extra support. And the participant said that he was really embarrassed because it was a couple of dollars to bowl and he couldn't afford it. And so the peer specialist sat down with him and they did a big look at the participant's budget and helped him identify that, hey, maybe there was money, but we have to be smart in how we budget it. And so they introduced an envelope system that the participant wanted to use. And it didn't work every month, but it did work for some of the months. And the participant was able to kind of set those funds aside for bowling. And then there's also group fundraising efforts that can happen. So one of our sites, I'll speak more to this later, their group actually decided to start fundraising for their PODS activities together. And so they came up with this whole system with their participants where they started selling bagged lunch and baked goods. And they had a big system for how someone's participation in the fundraiser led to X amount of money that would go on their account and they could take it out to use for different activities and things like that. And it really took off and they've raised, like, I think, well over a couple $1,000s among all the participants. And so things like that are just creative strategies that participants can come up with themselves. Limited access to transportation. For the collective meetings themselves, they typically tend to be in person, but offering them as a hybrid model when needed so that people can Zoom or call in from home if they're not able to get there that day. PODS members at a lot of sites have shared transportation. So if they have a support person who's driving them, giving someone else a ride or driving someone else. One of the sites had some people from the county come in and educate about different transportation options that existed. Finding walkable spots was a huge one. So just figuring out like, hey, transportation is really tough right now. So where can we actually just walk to and still have a good time and things like that. Limited knowledge of community resources. A lot of collective meetings, especially early on, can focus really heavily on figuring out and learning and exploring what resources are out there, almost doing like a scan of what's around us. And then again, grouping everyone's knowledge of what they know that's in the community. Perceived lack of belonging is a big one. And so again, having this group approach where people are doing activities together yeah, people are doing activities together, so they have someone to do it with, and really talking in the collective meetings to help kind of change this narrative. And then focusing on collective efficacy. So the group together can pursue this participation as opposed to just one person having to do it by themselves. So looking back over our last 3 years, really trying to focus on what is at the core of PODS. This is a quote from one of our facilitators, and they were reflecting kind of on PODS and how it went with their agency. And they said, I think that some of our participants have just learned to settle with where they are in life. And I think they just kind of figure this is how it's going to be. And when they started to believe that there could be more, that they could have social connections out in the community and do things that were actually fun with people who actually wanted to be with them, who chose to be with them in a way that other people were enjoying their lives and interacting with the world, I think that was a powerful realization. And this was something that in PODS we didn't really necessarily think about up front, was that this aspect of how it can help people experience hope. And so that's really what PODS is, right? It's about learning how to be, and it's about promoting independence and connecting with other people and really finding that community. So early on in PODS, the pilot, we were really experiencing a learning curve and how to help people explain PODS at their agency. This is a new program. We're trying to bring people together, do things in the community, but how do we actually explain this to people? And so I have a couple of quotes here about describing PODS because I thought it might be beneficial to hear. So the first one here is that PODS was a hard sell. It was unheard of for them to think outside the box. I think so many of them come from situations like group homes where their days are just completely planned for them. So for them to be able to say, hey, we're going bowling Friday night was just not something they've been used to their whole lives. So I just don't think they're used to making those sorts of decisions. So again, when we're first describing PODS and trying to bring people on board, like keeping that in mind and knowing that this is very different for people and helping to explain what it might look like is really helpful. And then last thing on here is, but most importantly, I've always told them that you're going to get out of this what you put into it, and it's directly driven by y'all. We're always there available as a safety net with everything, but you're the drivers of it all. So again, really helping participants know, like, this isn't something that I, as a staff person, am really going to run and plan and figure everything out for you. Whatever you put into this is kind of what we're going to get out of it. So what is your role going to be as a facilitator? I have a few, again, quotes on here about what it really meant for people to facilitate PODS. So this first facilitator, he said, I think it was our job to kind of plant the seed, maybe do a little watering and a little pruning here and there, but it's the most beautiful thing to sit back and see what happens. And the little seeds will drop and hopefully more plants will grow. This person spoke about how it's about setting the framework for them and the initial aspects of the collective meetings, and then really letting them go. As a facilitator for PODS, it's just being there when needed, but it's nice not being there because in this way they can flourish on their own. They can have some failures on their own and they can figure out how to pick each other up along the way. But just knowing you have a safety net behind you if you need to reach out to the facilitator when needed or if needed. Thankfully for me, I say that my job is to not have a job. I felt with PODS as it started going, I didn't need to do as much. I could just sit back and see their growth, which was great to see. So this quote here touches on a few things with promoting independence and things like that. The first thing this person mentioned was really like working yourself out of a job. And I think that is a key part of PODS, right? Is helping people learn how to be independent so that they don't need to rely on you as a facilitator anymore, or as much, I should say, which can be scary. I also really like how they mentioned like learning how to pick each other up along the way, because learning how to connect with peers and rely on each other and be relied on, I think is a really key part of this. Because people start to learn, hey, it matters if I don't show up because people are relying on me to contribute to this group. It's not just the facilitator who needs to be there; it's each individual person because of what they're going to contribute to that group. And so I think that learning how to work through those failures and kind of come back and support each other is a key part of this. Another big question that I got a lot in the pilot program was who is right for pods, right? Who should I invite to join pods? Who should be allowed to join pods? Things like that. And my answer was always like everyone is welcome in these groups because largely people can really surprise themselves and they can surprise you in what they are capable of doing. So I have this one longer quote from a facilitator about a person who really surprised themselves and the facilitator. So he said, for one person, he said he felt like they were going to fail. They're not going to be able to do this. It took a lot for them to even get to the first collective meeting. And then towards the end, they became the leader of the group. And then just reflecting back with them is like, wow, you know, remember when you were scared and you were terrified and all those emotions you were going through at that point? Now, how do you feel? Um, and just knowing it was like, wow, I may have wasted so much of my time, so much of my life worrying about the what ifs, or I didn't know I could be where I'm at today. I think it's hard with pods to give, or at least for me, give myself some of the credit. I mean, yeah, we laid the backbone, but they did all the work. They put everything into play, they ran with it, and it was just great to see. And I mean, this person started becoming the true leader of the group, which now has transcended into them regaining employment and everything as well. So it's just beautiful to see. So again, this isn't a unique story. A lot of agencies had people who really stepped into this role as a leader of pods. And initially they were very hesitant to join, or they were questioning if it was right for them or whatever that might be. A lot of times those individuals were the ones who really thrived and led the group and things like that. So rather than thinking about exactly who may be the best fit for pods, I think the more that we can welcome into this type of program, I think the better, because different people benefit from different types of things as well. So the next few slides are all going to focus on quotes regarding how to promote independence in the program, because that was one of the other really big learning curves of this project, was how to explain and how to really dive into this idea of promoting independence. It's something that's easy to say, but how do we actually like let go of control as facilitators and take that step back? I don't know if I mentioned this, but I used to work in a mental health treatment center. I think Brian did as well for a while. And that was one of the things that as like a staff person, like I struggle with sometimes looking back is like, how do you really like let groups just happen with you with less input as a staff person? So let's jump into that. So one facilitator at their agency, they were super um, actively involved in the pilot program. They came to all of our meetings. They were following the manual very closely. They were really into the whole thing, but they kind of felt like they were like hitting a wall at a point. They were like, we're doing all the things as facilitators, and the participants aren't picking things up. And ultimately, what the facilitators did is like they kind of got to their wits' end, and they were like, you know what, like we've done everything. Like this is on you guys now. This is your program. Do with this what you will. And they stopped meeting. They took a big step back, and then after a little while, they started getting these pictures in in their emails on the evenings and over the weekends of participants going out and doing things. So they were really, really pushing at first, and then when they were able to really take that step back and say, "What do you guys want this to look like? How do you want to move forward?" That is when they were able to really thrive. And when we talk about promoting independence, we're not promoting failure. We're not testing people. We're giving them this space to really learn how to do things without needing staff to do things for them. This can be a really challenging change for people sometimes because we're so used to the roles kind of being reversed. And so you are not going to get it right all the time. The participants aren't going to get it right all the time, and that's okay. It's just like the more little changes we can make and the more opportunities we have to be independent in specific instances is all we're kind of looking for. So a couple other facilitators, this first quote here said, I think it's also a really good intervention for us as staff members to realize that our folks can do things if we give them the opportunities to do things. And again, that's just the absolute best part of pods to me, is giving our individuals a structure and the ability to go out and do things that they are capable of. Another facilitator said I had to work hard to allow others to lead, and I would find myself interjecting and trying to lead when it wasn't necessary. And it was a very valuable reminder to me that I'm not needed, um, that the people in the pods group were very well equipped to do what they needed to do to get what they needed to get. So again, pods is for participants, but it really can be a good learning opportunity and almost training tool for staff as well. This person said sometimes when there's issues going on, I want to kind of jump in and fix it for them. But I think PODS has really sort of reinforced the belief that, these individuals are just so capable of doing the kind of things, being successful, and also with the help of each other. So it's just kind of reinforced that hope for me that they can succeed when they put their mind to it, and just the power of connection for them and working together in order to do that. So earlier I spoke about hope for participants, but it's also about hope for staff, right? Because when we're able to see things and see participants going out and doing things and feeling like they are regaining their sense of self and all those things, like that can be really nice for us as staff to see that like the programs are making a difference and people are really experiencing that recovery. Last quote about promoting independence. This person was acknowledging how difficult it is to promote independence because they're very solutions oriented. I want to give them the solutions and just tell them what to do. Fighting back against that is hard, and it's definitely a learning process. So while yes, the hands-off approach I think is the best part about it, it's also the hardest thing to learn as facilitators. And I think in some regards are individuals as well. Our participants have kind of learned, and some of their services have ingrained in them that, hey, you can't go and do that by yourself. Not that they meant to do that, I don't think, but that's inherently what they ended up learning. So I think pushback against that idea from us and our individuals has been a big challenge, but again, it pays off significantly. So I'm going to share just briefly a few other experiences from participants and agencies. The first one is I don't have a direct quote to share because I was just in conversation with someone. It wasn't from a focus group, but this participant was talking about how she really connected how mental health impacted her and others socially, and how she felt like that was a really big piece of it that was often overlooked in treatment, and how pods in promoting this opportunity to engage in the community and find activities again can really help reconnect with people and help you feel like yourself again, regain your tribe, she said, and have this safe space to really try something new, relax, and be who you are again, is what she spoke a lot about. Other folks were learning how to use public transportation, leaving their house for reasons other than treatment for the first time in a long time. A couple specific examples just to go through things quickly. I already mentioned the fundraising example, but there was one agency, the example I gave earlier about the guy who budgeted for the bowling. This group went bowling at least once a month on discount night, and they built a really strong community with other like attendees at the bowling alley and staff. So the peer specialist who ran that group, he didn't usually go out into the community with them because he's promoting that independence. But every once in a while, like once a quarter, I think, or so, he would jump in and join. And he said that he walked in there and like everyone in the bowling alley was saying hi to each other, including their members. And they had just built all of these other connections outside of the pods group. So it wasn't just these connections within the group, it was also these connections outside of it within the wider community. Other people often go to different community events together, like parades or fairs. They go to, a lot of groups make meals together and rotate between different apartment complexes to make the meals. People join game night at library, all sorts of different stuff. I have two quotes from participants, and then we'll move on from there. But one participant, he was in a book club, and a book club pod, I should say. And when they first created this book club pod, they were doing a traditional book club where everybody picks a book, or they pick one book and everyone reads that same book and then they kind of talk about it. And they said it really wasn't working. It wasn't vibing. People were disagreeing on what book to read, and then discussion was feeling a little bit stretched, and it just wasn't working out how they wanted it to. So during one of the collective meetings, they were really talking about like what was going on and how they could move forward from it. And they brought up this idea of a silent book club. And what they started doing instead was they would meet somewhere in the community and they would chit chat, hang out for a little bit of time at the beginning, and then everyone would just read their own book in the community. And then they would talk and then they would leave. And that's a big thing in the world right now, a silent book club. And so they just decided to try this model of it. And he talked about how he found reading as a group to be less anxious because he knew the people around them and we're all kind of doing the same thing. So it's like safety in numbers. Whereas if I was on my own, I wouldn't really get into it because I'd be anxious about it or be looking around. And I probably wouldn't go out and read in public on my own. But with the group, I think it's a bit easier. I don't know about the other guys and gals, but after coronavirus, I find that even if I'm not interacting with people, doing things in a crowd or with friends around you is nice just to be around other people. And then this participant, he said, with pods, I used to be shy. So when I started doing pods, I got out there more in the community, made friends that are out of group, and made me feel more that my mental health is bringing me down. So I use pods to cope instead of always being isolated. I met with this participant a few different times, and he always talked about how like pods specifically helped him break out of that like isolation that he had been doing before. And like when he found himself wanting to isolate again, he instead would like call someone from his group or go and do one of those activities together. So with pods, there has been an impact on agencies outside of pods, just anecdotally, like story wise. So one person talked about how on days when they have pods planned, their attendance at groups is a lot higher than on other days because people want to come and they want to participate. So when we were piloting this, we did talk about how this could potentially be used almost like as a way to change up other programming at the site. And then the other quote here, I won't read it all, but they talked about how PODS members themselves are also taking it upon themselves to start to pull in other folks at the agency to join and invite them on activities and build those connections so that it's kind of growing without staff even doing that. The last thing I'll end up with for the pilot before we talk about next steps is patience and persistence. So that is like one of the biggest things that we saw with the pilot is in order for things to really take off, a lot of times it took a lot of time. And so it took a lot of patience, it took a lot of persistence to continue supporting people, to continue showing up to those collective meetings, figure out what they want to do, and then go out and do them. Again, if people have been isolated for a long time and they haven't gone out and do these things, it's really hard sometimes to start doing that, like getting that momentum and feeling confident and feeling like you can go out and do those things. So it may take a long time upfront, especially when we're used to relying on other people to plan for us. But patience and persistence are two of the biggest things for success with this. Cool. So that was the pilot. So now we're kind of looking at next steps with this program, right? So our grant is wrapping up very soon. And so we're looking at kind of what comes next. With the pilot program, we provided a lot of like hands-on technical assistance and things like that to agencies, but now we're moving into dissemination. And with that means that agencies wherever can implement this without monitoring or support from Temple. So we will soon have a manual available that people can follow to implement the program, as well as training videos that you can watch to support your implementation of the project. So there is a QR code on the screen right now, and I'll also send a link in the chat. If you're interested in implementing pods, I encourage you to follow that link, scan the QR code, and fill out the brief survey. It asks like your name, your email, and a little information about your agency, and then we'll make sure that we get the manual and the trainings to you whenever it's available. We will also share that with everyone who registered for the event as well. Brian, I saw that you came off of mute. Did you have something to add? Okay, cool. But again, we will send that out as soon as it's available. We are also looking to continue expanding on pods in the future. So we are looking to, we're seeking additional grants and funding to do things such as supporting additional populations. So folks with mental health conditions was our primary focus in this initial pilot project, but in the future, we may want to explore supporting people with intellectual developmental disabilities and other groups as well. We also really want to build on our findings. So this wasn't a research study in and of itself. We collected some data, we did some research with it, but from our funders, the main focus was just an implementation like support project. And so there were a lot of limits to the data that we were able to collect. But we really want to be able to build on that and learn more about what worked and what didn't work and how exactly, like what the mechanisms behind pods are that really helps things be successful. And again, focus on continued sustainable programming. I am going to skip over this just so that we have time. I know there were a few questions coming through, so I'll just read a few notes. one of Brian and I's colleagues, Shinichi, he is a professor in Japan and he helped us develop pods initially. And he also implemented pods over in Japan. So he facilitated pods directly himself at one agency, and then he also supported other agencies to implement. And they saw a lot of the same things and the same experiences that we saw here. But I did just want to mention that in addition to Pennsylvania, pods was also implemented in Japan. Cool. And then quick thank yous to the Pennsylvania Department of Health for giving us the funding for this project, to our advisory groups for helping us develop the ideas and put things into practice, agencies, facilitators, and participants, and then also extra special thanks to some of our facilitators who were incredibly involved and kind of went above and beyond to participate throughout the whole project. So thank you for joining us. And we do have a couple of minutes for questions. Pull them
And
up.
I was going to add a couple of things.
Mhm.
We've talked a lot about the positive aspects of pods, and some of the questions came in about, will this work in other agencies and areas? And we definitely think that's the case. The idea is really around shared interest groups and how those can build collective efficacy, build social connection and meaningful social connection, and also provide opportunities for people to demonstrate their abilities as opposed to their disabilities, which oftentimes become part of people's master identity. I did see a number of folks who are with Centers for Independent Living, CILs, and definitely that's a possibility there. We really do think that that's one of the areas that this idea of pods could work very well. We've seen it implemented in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania has some very large urban areas, but has a whole lot of rural areas. And we have seen it implemented in rural settings as well. Granted, some of the challenges around transportation opportunities, these are different in rural communities, but it is possible. But the other thing too is that every agency that started it here in our demonstration wasn't a resounding success. There were some challenges. There were some programs that had personnel changes. So there are a lot of those things that are going on. The other thing too, we will have an implementation manual available for the PODS program this month. So we'll be happy to share that, and we'll share it out to the folks who are here. We really appreciate the interest. And one of the answers that I've been providing is that at the Temple Collaborative, we're here to provide some technical assistance. So if folks reach out and they're interested in trying to implement, we may look about, whether when we did it in Pennsylvania, we had facilitators connections, which was essentially a community of practice about